With my friend Joy Reid.
What the bottom line is right now is, as he tries to discredit the FBI and the Justice Department, and he mobilizes the Republicans to go along with that, he is inexorably moving toward a police state. Let's not kid ourselves. He wants to go and get Eric Prince and put together a mercenary separate army. He wants to use the most available terrorist event to be able to declare martial law, to be able to put into effect a world in which he controls it completely.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. That dark assessment of where America is headed under Donald Trump came from Tony Schwartz, a vocal Trump critic and the ghostwriter of The Art of the Deal, who joined me on this show on Saturday. Schwartz's dire warning comes as Trump continues to attack the FBI, the press, and anyone else involved in getting to the bottom of Russian interference in the election that made him president. And as he and his vehement supporters on Capitol Hill and in conservative media question the integrity of Robert Mueller, who for years has probably been the most respected federal law enforcement official in Washington on both sides of the aisle. It's one of those tools of authoritarianism that Trump has down to a science, undercutting anyone who gets in his way or calls his power into question. Like when he tweeted earlier this month about former FBI Director Jim Comey, quote, "After years of Comey with the phony and dishonest Clinton investigation running the FBI, its reputation is in tatters," something that those with actual knowledge of the FBI say is simply not true. Or when he repeatedly makes the claim that Russiagate is nothing but a lie.
There is absolutely no collusion. I didn't make a phone call to Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. Everybody knows it. That was a Democrat hoax. It was an excuse for losing the election, and it should have never been this way, where they spent all these millions of dollars.
It begs the question whether Trump will be successful in so distorting reality that even if Bob Mueller finds evidence of collusion between Russia and his campaign, or obstruction of justice or other crimes, Trump and his supporters will simply declare it all fake news and find a way to avoid justice. Joining me now is Malcolm Nance of the Terror Asymmetrics Project, Naveed Jamali, MSNBC Intel analyst and former FBI double agent, Sarah Kendzior, journalist and scholar of authoritarian states, and Anousheh Hossain, writer and commentator. I'm actually going to come to you first, Sarah, because I thought of you when I was on Hardball the other night, and I was asked by Chris Matthews for my assessment of what Donald Trump is doing with all of these attacks on federal law enforcement. This is what I had to say then. I want to get your take, since authoritarian states are your specialty. Step 1, claim the investigation of you is a fraud being conducted by enemies of the state. Step 2, get your state-run media, your affinity media, to echo that into your base and whip them up into a frenzy against those investigating you. Step 3, get the state party, in this case the Republican Party, to echo that from the seat of government. And then, of course, you got to add that last step, call for the prosecution of your political enemies, in this case dredging up Hillary Clinton, to again call to lock her up. So, Sarah, I need you to give me a reality check. Am I being hysterical here in equating what Donald Trump is doing with what the leaders, the kleptocratic leaders of authoritarian states do?
No, you're not being hysterical. Hysterical is just a word that people use to describe women who speak a plain truth. Trump has been on this path from the moment that he declared candidacy, whether it's the persecution of ethnic minorities, his clear intentions to use the government as a kleptocratic tool in order to enhance his family's personal wealth, his targets on free speech, freedom of religion, political opponents. And it's only gotten worse as he's gotten into office, as he's consolidated power, and as he's faced very little opposition from the Republicans, who should be serving the public, who should be keeping people like Trump and in his cadre of, other corrupt and criminal actors in check. And so, no, you're absolutely right to react in the way that you have.
And, Malcolm, this week we saw members of Congress, a co-equal branch of government, literally behaving as if they were the defense counsel for Donald Trump, right, attacking the FBI, accusing them of almost being criminals. It was breathtaking to watch Republicans do that, but they did it with such ferocity that you wonder, are they part of Donald Trump's administration, or are they a co-equal branch of government? Meanwhile, we find out that Republicans who are passing this exorbitant tax cut for the wealthy, something like 2/3 of members of Congress are themselves millionaires. It's almost as if Donald Trump and Republicans politicians are creating their own oligarchy, where they're personally being enriched by the tax cuts, personally being enriched by the policy of the administration, and then they turn around and 100% back the leader.
You know, it's funny you should mention that. I'm writing a whole book about this. And, you know, initially when I wrote Plot to Hack America, I thought Donald Trump is an accidental autocrat. This is a guy who is doing things for his own self-worth, his own valuation of his family's stock. He is not doing it to benefit the United States, but he's not doing it with great malice. He's doing it because he only understands money. Now I think he's an autocrat of animosity, where it is done out of hatred of his enemies. And I really do believe some of the things that he's doing now, he thinks that he understands the levers of power. He thinks that he's being surrounded by people who will be obsequious to him and will execute his will. His problem is democracy. Democracy is eating him alive right now. And when he butts up against that, this is very interesting. He goes to the Vladimir Putin playbook. Putin, when he came into power, was in the anti-corruption in the late 1990s.
Yep. Drain the swamp.
First thing he did, drain the swamp, was a Russian phrase. The first thing he did, he bought the news media. Literally got his oligarch friends to buy the news media, and then turned the news media and that fledgling democracy against itself using democratic tools like elections.
Yeah, and you know, you think about it, Naveed, and even down to things that we read in George Orwell novels, the idea of banning words themselves. This is the thing that in the last 24 hours that has come forward. We thought it was just at the CDC, but it turns out multiple agencies, including Health and Human Services, were told they are not allowed. This is a piece from the, I think this is in the Washington Post. The Trump administration has informed multiple divisions within the Department of Health and Human Services that they should avoid using certain words or phrases in official documents being drafted for next year's budget. The second HHS agency received similar guidance to avoid using the word entitlement, diversity, and vulnerable, according to an official who took part in a briefing. So the CDC and other agencies are being told they may not use certain words, and also that they must only refer to the Affordable Care Act as Obamacare, because Donald Trump hates Barack Obama, clearly, in Obamacare. These are the 7 words, the 7 banned words: vulnerable, entitlement, diversity, transgender, fetus, evidence-based, and science-based. The words that must not be spoken by members of the Trump government.
It's crazy. I mean, look, Joy, he's gone after the federal government. He's disassembled it. The only other target left out there are the cities. I mean, that's really, at this point, we have a barely functioning federal government. The only places that are going to defend these rights are going to be the states and the cities. And I guarantee you the next battle is going to be against the cities. They're going to pull back funding. They tried in the courts. Now you're going to see DOJ with Sessions go after sanctuary cities. And what does an authoritarian state or a police state look like? It's going to look like when the NYPD is now required to get federal funding. When they arrest someone, they're going to have to prove to the federal government that that person is a U.S. citizen. That is going to be the next battle. And it's not going to be the military coming in. It's going to be something as simple as a data call. Yeah. Are you tracking the citizenship of the people that are getting aid, whether it's education, whether it's medical care? That's what they're going to push on, and I think that's the battle.
And I mean, and it's important that they are trying to essentially force blue cities, people who are, you know, cities that are run by Democrats who want compassion for the poor, want to protect immigrants, to say, no, you can't do that. We will literally force you to adopt Trumpian policy against your will.
Can I make a quick point? Did you notice when he went to the FBI Academy the other day, right before he went there, he criticized the FBI? Another component of an authoritarian state, a Stasi-like state, is that you pit police, which is what he's doing, the regular beat cops, the million police in the United States, against federal law enforcement, as if he wants to split them as 2 entities. One completely and totally supports Trump, the other doesn't, or the other is working towards justice. Right? And if he does that, and with the people that he's introduced over at Department of Homeland Security, it's really scary. I mean, you are now pushing towards creating your own instruments within government that will do your will.
It's interesting that you say that, because, you know, my husband and I went to Cuba not long ago, once it was opened up to be able to go, and you have in Cuba this bifurcation. You have the police, and then you have the guys in the green military uniforms who sort of police the police, and there's sort of 2 separate agencies that are sort of watching each other in a way that one can actually intimidate the other.
He already has political commissars.
I want to go to Anousheh Hossain on this, because it isn't just Russia, right? You have autocratic governments, Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. You know, you had Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. You have governments throughout the world that operate as both kleptocracies, essentially a family running a country, and as autocracies where you don't have freedom of speech and where anyone who is considered to be an enemy of the state is purged out of government. We just had this report on Friday by the New York Times. And this is out of the EPA, one of the agencies Republicans have long wanted to get rid of because it stops people from polluting, rich corporations from polluting. EPA contractor has spent the last year scouring the agency for anti-Trump officials. One of the top officials of a consulting firm that the Environmental Protection Agency has recently hired to help it with media affairs has spent the last year investigating agency employees who have been critical of the Trump administration, federal records show. Have you ever heard of an American administration purging federal agencies for ideological dissent?
You know, Joy, I can't even overestimate how terrifying this is. And, you know, going back to the list of words that are actually banned, I mean, the CDC and HHS does so much work for women's health and AIDS. And how can we not use words such as evidence-based? And, you know, the word climate change is already disappearing from government websites as we speak. And it just goes to show that this fake presidency, this fake administration cannot deal with facts.
And, you know, it keeps going on. It goes on. Let's talk a little bit about, and I'll come to you on this, Naveed. Donald Trump has popularized this term fake news. It's one of his favorite phrases. That term has now become popular among autocrats. In countries where press freedom, and this is a report, I don't know where this is from, my producer can tell me what, this is the New York Times. In countries where press freedom is restricted under considerable threat, including Russia, China, Turkey, Libya, Poland, Hungary, Thailand, Somalia, and others, political leaders have invoked fake news as justification for beating back media scrutiny.
I mean, that's exactly part of the playbook. I mean, look, one of the criticisms about Donald Trump, not even criticism, one of the legal challenges he faces is that he asked James Comey to take a loyalty pledge to him. At what point is that going to be brought down to not just the federal government, but is it going to go down to some poor person who's the dog catcher in some small town? At what point do officials in government have to take a loyalty pledge? It's the same thing with media. He doesn't want independent investigative reporting. He wants to be able to release what he wants to release, and that should be it.
And by the way, he has these loyal supporters, this sort of squad of people on the far right, Roger Stone on down, who are hunting media, who are essentially sending, you know, you had Project Veritas trying to bait media to run fake news stories so they can discredit journalists, trying to get journalists fired, trying to dig up dirt on journalists, and then literally trying to rinse the media of anyone who dissents from Donald Trump so that all that's left are the Fox Newses, the Daily Callers, the people who are willing to be admiring him. I'm sorry, first Anusha and then Malcolm.
Yeah, you know, and we don't really have to look too far to see whose playbook he's following. Look at the men that he admires, the political leaders that he admires around the world. We can call them strongmen, but really they're dictators, okay? And the things that he admires about them is because he has no appreciation for democracy. He's running a kleptocracy. He would love to run a country the way Putin runs his country, you know, no press freedom, no checks and balances on people's powers. He would love to run the country the way Duterte is doing in the Philippines. So it's absolutely crazy to me, and it just comes down to, it blows my mind how this man, the President of the United States, is he not a patriot? Is he not a patriot? He believes the Kremlin over U.S. intelligence agencies. Well, it just blows my mind.
We know that he admires Vladimir Putin, Malcolm, the three guys in the world that he most admires, according to a report about 60 sources in the Washington Post: Xi Jinping of China, Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, and Putin.
That's absolutely amazing. This is my point that you were making about the EPA director. All right, we've known for almost a year now that he was putting literally political commissars into the administration. This has never occurred in the history of the United States, where there were people there to test your ideological purity to Donald Trump, not to the Constitution, not to the defense of this nation. The Constitution is under attack. American democracy, as it existed since 1783, when they ratified the Constitution, is under attack. True patriots should stand up to that. If I was in one of these administrations and somebody comes into my office and he says, hey, well, we're going to have to talk about your attitude towards things politically, I'd dime that person out. I mean, you got to go right to your IG's office, because you swear an oath. I swore an oath. He swore an oath. We protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, including within our own government.
We don't do l'état c'est moi. Donald Trump is not the state. And Sarah, you were tweeting, I think you tweeted about this yesterday. that Donald Trump has even invoked the idea that continuing the Russiagate investigation, he said people will die, that the artificial Democratic hit job gets in the way, and that's a shame because people will die because of it, and it's a pure hit job. Do you know what he was talking about when he said that?
No, and if you look at the transcript, it's extremely unclear. It could ostensibly refer to foreign policy regarding North Korea or Syria, but you have to ask what kind of collaboration is he having with Russia? Because we know that there's been a lot of illicit collaboration, a lot of off-the-books collaboration. We know he sought nuclear partnerships with Russia since the 1980s, when he wasn't even involved in government. And when a president casually says that a number of people will die and, gee, that's too bad, that's very disturbing. That's in line with the kind of, cavalier, callous remarks that he's made about Americans who have died, including overseas, his attitude towards veterans. I don't think that he has any respect, not just for the Constitution, not just for the country, but for the sanctity of human life itself. And that is not a quality that you want in a president. And it's alarming that very few people have followed up on that, have asked him, well, what do you mean by that? Who will die and by what mechanism? That's something that people should absolutely be following up on.
Yeah, it's a pretty extreme way to say that you have to end an investigation of potential criminality in his former campaign because it's life and death. I'm going to hold everybody for just 1 second. We're going to take a quick commercial break because we have to pay for this airtime. I'm bringing all of my guests back on the other side. And coming up, Donald Trump is very upset that somebody wants his emails. Irony is dead, but we'll be back.
Colleagues to join me in calling for the firing of Bob Mueller.
This is disgusting, unaccountable bias, and there's no way that could not affect a person's work.
I think the public trust in this whole thing is gone.
We are now beginning to better understand the magnitude of this insider bias on Mr. Mueller's team.
While congressional Republicans continue to push their pretext for Donald Trump to fire Special Counsel Robert Mueller, the resistance is making its own preparations to push back. MoveOn.org is already organizing a rapid response strategy to convene protests within hours of any announcement that Mueller has been fired. And this week, as Trump allies' drumbeat to fire Mueller reached a fever pitch, Walter Schaub, the former director of the U.S. Office of Government Ethics, sounded his own call to resist, tweeting, "Make a plan, folks. Be ready to take to the streets. This is an attack on our republic." Malcolm Nance and Naveed Jamali are back with me, and we're now joined by Business Insider political correspondent Natasha Bertrand, who's been on fire with this reporting lately. So thank you for making some time for us. Okay, Natasha, there are two separate stories that I want you to unpack so that people can understand the difference between them. I, at this point, am a little bit confused. You reported on Friday that the Department of Justice is saying that the release of those private text messages, selected text messages between two FBI agents who were on the Hillary Clinton email probe, that was not authorized. Explain.
So the OIG is investigating these text messages sent by Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, which were essentially anti-Trump. They expressed a lot of disdain for Trump during the election between 2015
but not just Trump.
and 2016.
I mean, they didn't like a lot of people.
Right. So they didn't like Bernie Sanders. They didn't like Eric Holder, etc. So the OIG actually did authorize the release of these text messages to Congress last month. But what was interesting about this is that he did not authorize, or he was not consulted before these text messages were then released to the press last week. Now, there was also early this month, early December, these text messages were actually leaked to certain members of the media, and those were very vague characterizations of the text messages, just that they were anti-Trump, etc. And that then led Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, to put pressure on the Justice Department, saying that he was essentially going to subpoena them for the text messages. So the Justice Department now was under pressure to release the texts, which are, again, under investigation. It's very unusual for these private correspondences to be released to either Congress or the press while they're still under investigation. So this was another attempt to kind of muddy the waters and undermine Mueller's probe.
So let me just for a moment. Do we know whether or not the release of those text messages came from the top of the Department of Justice, meaning Jeff Sessions is recused from this investigation, Devin Nunes is recused from this investigation? How does it happen that selected text messages from an FBI agent that are selectively characterized as anti-Trump end up in the hands of Devin Nunes?
We don't know. We don't know who actually. So that was a leak. That was the unauthorized leak that I reported on.
It was designed to help Donald Trump. Let's be clear.
It was yes. It gave him ammunition to say that this is a biased investigation, and ultimately it did. did help him with that narrative. But we still don't know who authorized the release of the text text messages to the press. It was not the OIG, so we're still trying to figure out who that was.
Okay, let's now go to story number 2. And this is that Bob Mueller has obtained emails that have to do with the transition, the Trump transition into office. Explain that.
Right. So Axios reported last night that the transition team actually was using government email servers to conduct its business over the course of the transition. And the GSA, which is the organization that oversees the transition team and its emails, actually gave those emails to Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller is, of course, a government authority, so he has the ability to send a letter to the GSA and say, hey, can I see these emails? And without a subpoena, actually. So it's a very basic process. Then Trump's lawyers, the Trump transition team lawyers, actually went and sent a letter to Congress, bypassing Mueller entirely, kind of try to bring this into the court of public opinion, saying that what Mueller did was unlawful because he went around the transition team. And the reason why Mueller went around the transition team, people think, is because he did not trust them to hand over all of the relevant emails. He believed perhaps that some of them would be deleted because, of course, that is what the transition team, what the lawyers would have done. They would have sorted out what they call irrelevant emails before.
You mean the way Hillary Clinton sorted out what were private emails from the emails that she turned over that were the source of Donald Trump saying lock her up?
That is
so you
what
mean they did the same thing?
That is what they wanted to do before they handed them over to Mueller.
And they're upset that their emails have been distributed. That's interesting as well. Lots of irony here. I want to read the response from the spokesperson for Bob Mueller responding to the Reuters story and the NBC News national security reporter and Ken Delaney, our own Ken Delaney also reported on this as well. And they said the following: when we have obtained emails in the course of our ongoing criminal investigation, we have secured either the account owner's consent or appropriate criminal process. Well, they didn't have their consent. That says to me that obtaining those emails was a part of their appropriate criminal process.
It was a government-to-government request, right? I mean, Bob Mueller is a government authority, and the GSA is a government agency. They were using private email servers, and actually the government email servers, and actually one of the top attorneys for the GSA came out and said, well, actually, if they had read the fine print, they would have realized that there was no expectation of privacy here.
And by the way, guys, the GSA, for those who do not understand the General Services Administration, it's not some anti-Trump bastion. It's the agency that let him have the hotel. It's the agency that authorized Donald Trump, President of the United States, to own a hotel blocks from the White House and make money letting foreign officials stay in the hotel and swipe their cards. That's who the GSA is.
It's an administrative agency.
It's an administrative agency.
Of the United States government.
So lots of irony here that I want to talk back to you guys. You guys are going to remember my analysts here on this. Let's start with the release of those text messages. I'm going to start with you first because you were an FBI double agent, so you worked with these people. Yeah. The idea that an agent inside the FBI would have their personal text messages selectively released in order to bolster a case that the FBI is biased against Donald Trump. Your thoughts?
It's absurd. I mean, look, this goes back to, we're losing sight of the context, right? So this harkens back to the days of the unmasking, a few months ago, right? Where essentially the Republicans were trying to frame this idea that there was intelligence that unmasked Trump officials, U.S. persons, and that was somehow biased against Trump, that there was this improper, and as Donald Trump said, his wires were tapped. I mean, it's completely taking things out of context. You're allowed to have a personal opinion. You're allowed to vote for a Democrat or Republican. Look, there's no doubt about that. At the worst, what these people did was use a government device for, personal
sexual affairs.
Right.
They were chatting.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that they're not objective, professional, individuals who are able to do their job.
And we should make the point that at the time, Strzok, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, was not investigating Donald Trump. This was during the campaign. He was investigating Hillary Clinton.
That's right.
Okay, so that's important. Okay, let's go to the next thing, which is the potential constitutional crisis that we talked about in the opening here. The potential of firing Bob Mueller. This is Jackie Spear, Congresswoman, on Friday, talking about a rumor on the Hill about Mueller imminently being fired. Take a listen.
The rumor on the Hill, when I left yesterday, was that the president was going to make a significant speech at the end of next week, and on December 22nd, when we are out of D.C., he was going to fire Robert Mueller.
Okay, one more quick soundbite. This is Rod Rosenstein, who is the only person who is legally allowed to fire Bob Mueller. He is the Deputy Attorney General. This is him talking at the House Oversight hearing on Wednesday.
Have you seen good cause to fire Special Counsel Mueller?
No. I believe that based upon his reputation, his service, his patriotism, and his experience with the department and with the FBI, I believe he was an ideal choice for this task.
All right, let me turn to my journalist here. Have you heard, do you have any reporting that backs up what Jackie Spear is saying, that there are rumors on the Hill that Bob Mueller is imminently going to be fired right before Christmas?
I have heard the same thing, but the way that he would probably do it is by repealing a regulation that would prevent him from directly firing Bob Mueller himself. So right now, really the only way that he could, one of the only ways that he could fire Mueller is by going through Rosenstein. But there is one other way, and this is built into the special counsel regulations back in the early 2000s, which is that he could essentially repeal that regulation that would then allow him to fire Mueller directly. He would not have to go around Rosenstein. Now, whether or not there's a kind of comment period that would, require him to make this announcement and then step back and wait for people to weigh in on whether or not that's actually, allowed is up for debate. And that's actually something that needs to be explored more. But there is a way legally where he could do it himself.
Deregulation is Donald Trump's other big thing, ironically enough. Good timing, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, we know that he wants Bob Mueller out. Every time that the investigation hits a crescendo where there's some news drop that shows that something is happening, what does Donald Trump do? He freaks out. He goes after people. He starts attacking. As an intelligence officer, this is what we would call indications and a warning.
Yeah, and he's using his affinity media, he's using basically state media, what it amounts to at this point, to whip up a frenzy on the right that Mueller is essentially a criminal.
Well, over at Fox News, we saw that they had a headline with Kellyanne Conway that said, a coup is happening. This is insane, all right? Do I have to be the one that comes out and tells the American public, the last time we had a crisis of this magnitude was not the Civil War. The Civil War, they at least used the precepts of the Constitution to make a legal separation from the United States. It was George III, and it's enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. Other than putting troops in your house, many of these things are happening. If he takes away the fundamental ability for us to police ourselves and to police a president of the United States, he has done the ultimate obstruction and justice. He is dismantling the Constitution, and it cannot stand. We cannot allow it to stand. Those of us who have sworn this oath, anybody who is watching this, who is in government right now, who would think that this is good, well, then you're just joining a Politburo. Okay, and we don't need Saddam Hussein's People's Council here to cheer him on. What we need to do is defend this nation's democracy.
Well said. Malcolm Nance, Naveed Jamali, Natasha Bertrand, thank you all for being here. I'm sorry this is such an alarmist open to the show, but this is serious stuff, and you really need to start thinking about it. I've said before, you need to start using your lurid imagination to understand Donald Trump, or start looking at governments around the world, because a lot of people across this world live with governments like this for decades. In the United States, we have mechanisms that are supposed to be able to protect us. We need to start using them. Coming up, I'm off my soapbox. The latest on the unrest caused by Donald Trump's comments on Jerusalem after the break.